I sent my golden son to prison after he abused my daughter and told her no one would ever believe you. When he passed, my wife blamed the girl and walked into her room with a bat. I kicked her out and filed for divorce before morning. Hey Reddit! My wife and her family always treated our son like royalty and acted like our daughter barely existed. I was working nonstop, trying to hold everything together until the truth blew everything open. Before I get into the chaos that came after, let me start from the beginning. My name is Luis, I'm 42, and for most of my adult life I thought I had a pretty normal setup. I work a demanding job in maintenance management, the kind that eats your weekdays and sometimes your weekends too. My wife is Nova, the girl I married at 23 after finding out she was pregnant with our son, River. Back then, I didn't hesitate. I figured stepping up was what a man was supposed to do. Provide, protect, keep the roof solid and the bills paid. I went into that role so fast I barely looked around. By the time River was born, I was working full-time plus overtime. Nova stayed home and her family, especially her sister Madison, treated River like he came from some higher bloodline. I didn't think much of it at first. First kid, first grandchild, excitement everywhere. But it didn't wear off. They kept that same level of worship going his entire life. Every achievement was exaggerated like he was the second coming. If he got a B on a test, it was because the teacher didn't appreciate his special mind. If he broke something, it was because he was too creative. That kind of stuff adds up. By the time River hit his teenage years, he carried himself like the house belonged to him. He talked to Nova like she worked for him, and treated Madison like his personal hype woman. He'd brag, boast, demand, expect everything to bend around him. He wasn't just confident, he was arrogant and rude. He tried to disrespect me too, but I shut that down fast. Even then, he'd mock me behind my back when he thought I couldn't hear. Nova would say, "He's just joking," and Madison would laugh like he was some charming rebel. River is 19 now, technically an adult, but still living at home while he finished a local trade program. Then there was Grace, my daughter. She's 14 now, and from the moment she was born, she got the complete opposite treatment. She was the quiet baby, the easy toddler, the kid who didn't complain. While River got cameras shoved in his face for every little milestone, Grace barely got noticed unless she needed something. And even then, Nova acted like Grace was inconveniencing her. I won't lie, my job kept me gone a lot. Not because I didn't want to be home, but because I wanted to make sure we were taken care of. When River was younger, I had more free time and naturally spent more of it with him. By the time Grace came along, my workload had doubled, and River was already the center of Nova's universe. Grace became the kid everyone automatically assumed would be fine, but she wasn't fine. Looking back, I see it clearly. At the time, I missed a lot of things. River started picking on her early. He'd take her stuff and laugh when she cried. He'd tease her until she hid in her room. He'd make comments about how she was boring or too sensitive or always in the way. He learned very quickly that Nova would defend him no matter what. I didn't like how he treated her, but Nova always smoothed it over, and Madison acted like Grace was dramatic. I told myself I just wasn't around enough to understand their dynamic. I assumed they'd grow out of it. Grace kept shrinking into herself as River got louder. I noticed it, but I didn't understand the depth behind it. With how often I was working, I chalked it up to normal teenage moods. Nova never questioned River. Not once. If Grace said he took something, she was told to stop exaggerating. If Grace said she didn't want River in her room, Nova said, "He's your brother, don't be rude." Madison backed Nova every single time, saying Grace needed to toughen up. Meanwhile, River grew into exactly what they built him to be: entitled, ungrateful, and convinced the world owed him something. He'd snap at Grace for existing, and then ask Nova what was for dinner like nothing happened. And every time I tried to address it, Nova claimed I was being too hard on him, that I didn't understand teenagers, that I was overreacting because I was tired from work. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was too focused on providing. Maybe I thought because Grace was quiet and did well in school and never caused issues, she must be okay. I trusted Nova to handle things at home while I handled the outside world. I thought we were a normal family with normal problems. I thought providing was enough. It wasn't. The shift with Grace didn't happen all at once. It was slow, almost quiet enough to ignore if you weren't paying attention. She stopped watching shows in the living room. She'd wait until River was out of the kitchen before getting a snack. She'd pause outside a hallway like she was checking to make sure he wasn't there. She barely spoke at home, and when she did, it was short answers. Eyes down, voice shaky. Anytime River entered a room, she stiffened. If he walked past her, she pulled her hands close to her body like she expected him to take something. I asked Nova a few times if she noticed Grace acting different. She brushed it off. She's 14, Luis. That's how girls are. Hormones. She's fine. But she didn't look fine. She looked scared. School started calling too. First it was about her missing homework, then about her zoning out in class, then about her refusing to participate. Nova ignored all of it. She'd silence her phone, roll her eyes and say, they pick on her because she's quiet. When the school emailed, she deleted the messages. I didn't know she was doing that until later. Then one morning, I got a call at work from a number I didn't recognize. It was Grace's homeroom teacher. She sounded serious, the type of serious that makes you put down whatever you're holding. Mr. Santiago, she said, I need you to come in. Today. I asked if Nova could handle it. She said, no, it needs to be you. That was the first time anyone said something like that to me. I left work mid-shift. I didn't ask permission. I just walked out. When I got to the school, the teacher and the school counselor were waiting in a small conference room. Grace wasn't there. They told me she was in the counselor's office with another staff member. Both women looked nervous. One had a folder in her hands she kept gripping too tightly. Then the counselor cleared her throat and said, Grace told us something very concerning today. My chest tightened. I braced myself without knowing why. She disclosed that River has been touching her, the counselor said, in ways that are not appropriate. She described multiple incidents. She was shaking while she talked. I didn't hear anything after River, and it felt like my mind stopped for a few seconds. Not because I doubted her, but because everything suddenly aligned. The fear, the distance, the flinching, the silence. I asked if Grace was safe right now. They said yes. I asked if she needed medical care. They said no signs of immediate injury, but they had already contacted the authorities because they're mandatory reporters. They explained more details, but I only caught pieces. Enough to know River didn't just bully her. He violated her. I didn't question Grace for a second. Nova burst into the room about 5 minutes later, already yelling. What is this? Why am I hearing lies about my son? The teacher tried to calm her, but it made her worse. She pointed at the staff like they were attacking her personally. You're twisting things, she snapped. Grace is shy. She probably misunderstood something. River would never... I cut her off. Stop. She glared at me like I betrayed her. The counselor tried explaining again, but Nova kept interrupting, getting louder and angrier until she suddenly stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to make a kid in the hallway flinch. Not even 10 minutes later, Madison showed up. She was on the pickup list, and she used that like a permission slip to storm in. She marched down the hall like she owned the place, and immediately started shouting that the school was spreading disgusting rumors about River. She said the staff had a personal agenda, that Grace was being coached, that someone wanted to ruin River's life. The principal had to escort her out of the building. While all this was happening, the school had already notified CPS, who arrived shortly after. They spoke with the teachers, then with me. They said they needed to speak to Grace directly, and I agreed. Grace came in with red eyes, her hands shaking. She wouldn't look at me at first. She looked like she expected to get in trouble. When CPS asked her questions, she nodded silently or whispered answers. Every time she said River's name, her whole body tensed. Nova refused to come back into the room. She sat in the main office yelling on her phone to someone, probably Madison, about how this was all an attack on our family. She never once asked to see Grace. Watching Grace speak to CPS broke something in me. I realized she didn't come to me because she thought I wouldn't believe her. I'd been gone so much that she probably didn't think I'd even notice if something was wrong. The guilt hit me hard, not in a dramatic way, just a heavy, steady weight that didn't go away. When CPS finished, they told us what would happen next and what steps needed to be taken. Grace looked exhausted, terrified, small. I put my hand on her shoulder and she leaned into me, just barely, but enough to tell me she needed me. I walked her to the car while Nova stayed inside yelling at staff. Grace held onto my sleeve like she thought someone might pull her away. Sitting there with her, watching her stare at her knees, I promised myself something quietly. I wasn't going to leave her alone again. Not for work, not for Nova, not for anyone. Everything changed in that meeting, and nothing about our family would ever be the same again. CPS didn't waste time. The morning after the school meeting, they came to the house with paperwork and a straight, calm explanation of what had to happen. River can't remain in this home while Grace is here, the caseworker said. If he stays, we may have to remove Grace for her safety. The caseworker explained that even though River was legally an adult, he couldn't remain in the home with a minor child while the investigation was active. Nova's face twisted like she'd been slapped. You're not taking my son out of this house over lies, she snapped. Grace is confused. She always gets overwhelmed. She probably imagined, Stop, I said. They already talked to her. This isn't confusion. Nova pointed at me like I was the enemy. You're just taking their side because you're never home to see what actually happens. Before I could answer, Madison barged in through the unlocked front door like she owned the place. What's going on? Why are government people here? She didn't wait for an answer. She turned to the CPS worker. You're not removing River. He didn't do anything. Grace is emotional and impressionable. The caseworker repeated, he must leave the home. If the family refuses to comply, we'll take further action. Madison raised her voice. This is harassment. We'll sue every single one of you. Everything dissolved into shouting. Nova yelling. Madison threatening. The caseworker trying to stay professional. Grace stood in the hallway, half hidden behind her bedroom door, clutching the frame like she needed it to hold herself up. I stepped forward. Enough. River's leaving. Today. Nova's face went cold. Madison looked stunned, like I'd stabbed her favorite golden statue. But I didn't care. Grace's eyes were wide and wet, and that was all that mattered. Before CPS even had time to schedule anything, the next disaster hit. Grace had a breakdown at school. It happened just a couple of hours after they left our house. I got a call from the school again. Not Nova, me. Mr. Santiago, Grace is having a panic attack. She can't breathe. We need you here now. I didn't ask questions. I walked out of a work meeting mid-sentence. My boss called after me, but I kept going. When I got to the school nurse's office, Grace was curled up on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. Her face was red, her breathing sharp and fast. Hey, I said softly, dropping to my knees beside her. I'm here. You're okay. I'm right here. She grabbed onto my arm with both hands like she was drowning. She held on so tightly my sleeve stretched. The nurse said, she kept saying she didn't want to go home. I nodded. She won't. Not until she feels safe. It took a while for Grace to calm down, but she didn't let go of me the entire time, and I didn't rush her. When she was finally able to stand, she whispered, Can we go? Yeah, I said. Let's go. I walked her to the car slowly, making sure she felt steady. She stayed close to me the whole way. In that moment, something shifted. She wasn't just looking for help, she was choosing me, and I knew I couldn't fail her again. When we got home, police were there with CPS. They had finished interviewing River at his trade program and planned to remove him that evening. River came in through the back door around 6, acting oblivious. Why are cops outside? What's happening? He asked, annoyed. Nova lunged toward him. They're saying terrible things about you, baby. We're going to fix this. Grace heard his voice and immediately hid behind me, her fingers gripping the back of my shirt. River scoffed. Why are you hiding? Are you seriously doing this? River, I said. You need to go with the officers. He glared at me. You're choosing her over me? No, I said firmly. I'm choosing what's right. The officers stepped forward. River pulled back, yelling at them. Nova screamed, Don't touch him! Madison was already threatening lawsuits again, shouting, We'll destroy all of you. You're kidnapping him. Grace buried her face in my back, shaking. The officers cuffed River and led him out the front door. He yelled the entire time. Nova tried to chase after them, until the caseworker stopped her. The street was filled with neighbors watching, flashing lights, shouting, crying. Our whole life was suddenly on display. Inside the house, Nova collapsed on the couch, sobbing loudly. My son, she cried. They're taking my son. Grace stood silently behind me, trembling, watching her mother fall apart without even glancing in her direction. Nova didn't ask if Grace was okay. Not once. That told me everything. That night, Grace wouldn't sleep unless I stayed nearby. I didn't push her to talk. She'd been through enough. I set up blankets in the hallway outside her door. Dad? She whispered. Yeah? Are you staying there? As long as you want me to. After a few seconds, she said, Okay, and closed the door softly. I laid there in the dim hallway, listening to the quiet of the house. Nova didn't check on Grace. She stayed in the bedroom crying over River. Madison kept pacing the living room, ranting about lawyers and conspiracies. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Within a few weeks, River had been interviewed multiple times. Lawyers got involved, and the DA pushed the case forward. River didn't outright confess, but he admitted enough during questioning, enough details that lined up with what Grace told the school counselor, that the prosecution had a solid case. Hearing that almost knocked the wind out of me. It was confirmation from his own mouth. Every court appearance felt unreal. Nova showed up in dresses that looked meant for a holiday party, acting like the judge would somehow see how well she presented and decide River couldn't have possibly done anything wrong. She kept her chin high, glaring at everyone who didn't smile at her. Whenever Grace's name came up, Nova scoffed, shook her head, or whispered to Madison. It was like she lived in a different version of reality. Meanwhile, Madison made it her mission to convince the entire extended family that I had brainwashed Grace. She told anyone who would listen that I'd turned Grace against River to punish Nova for relying on me financially. I found out she'd been sending voice messages saying things like, "Luis is manipulating that girl. He always had control issues." None of it surprised me. Madison was the type who couldn't handle the idea that the golden boy wasn't actually golden. The gossip spread past family. Neighbors stared. A few parents at Grace's school pulled their kids closer when we walked by. Online rumor threads popped up. People filled the gaps with whatever versions they preferred. I tried to ignore it, but I saw Grace shrink whenever she caught whispers in hallways or comments under breaths. At work, most people avoided bringing it up, but Tom, a co-worker I'd known for years, pulled me aside during a break. "You did the right thing," he said. "A lot of guys wouldn't have had the guts." I didn't say much back, but I appreciated it more than he knew. Grace started therapy right away. The clinic scheduled weekly sessions, and I made sure to attend every single one I could. If I couldn't get off work, I called ahead and checked in with the therapist afterward. Grace never said much after sessions, but she always looked lighter when she walked out. That alone kept me committed. It didn't take long for Nova to try interfering. One morning, the clinic called me. "Mr. Santiago, your wife contacted us," the receptionist said. "She requested that Grace be transferred to a different therapist. Immediately." I felt my jaw tighten. "Without my consent?" "Yes," she said. "She claimed Grace is being influenced, and that the current therapist is—" Her words were twisting her memory. "We wanted to confirm with you before making any changes." I thanked them for calling and drove home. Nova was in the kitchen, scrolling her phone. "I talked to the clinic," I said. She looked up, annoyed. "Good. They need to switch her therapist. That woman is turning Grace against her own family." "No," I said. "You're not messing with her treatment." Nova scoffed. "Luis, you're too blind to see it. They're filling her head with ideas. She barely remembers things correctly." "Stop," I said firmly. "She remembers exactly what happened, and you're not interfering with her recovery again." Nova slammed her phone down. "So, you choose her over River?" "I'm choosing the child who didn't hurt anyone." She didn't respond. She just walked out of the room, muttering under her breath. Later that week, I found Grace's old phone in a drawer while looking for a charger. I almost didn't turn it on, but something made me check it. The messages were still there. They started as friendly texts from River, then slowly shifted. Manipulation disguised as brotherly concern, guilt-tripping about family loyalty, and then more explicit threats. There were messages telling her to keep quiet, saying she'd ruin everything if she spoke up, telling her no one would believe her. Reading them made my hands shake. I sat in the hallway and scrolled through months of messages, each one worse than the last. I'd been in that same hallway for years, leaving early for work, coming home late, thinking everything was fine, all while Grace lived through hell a few rooms over. My stomach twisted. That was the moment the truth finally hit me completely. I hadn't just missed signs. I had left her alone in a house where she never felt safe. The next day, I turned the phone over to my lawyer so it could be preserved and handed to the investigators properly. That night, after dinner, Grace approached me quietly. "Dad?" "Yes, sweetheart." She looked down at her hands. "Why didn't you see it? Why didn't you notice what he was doing?" I swallowed hard. "Because I worked too much. And I trusted the wrong people," I said. "But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere again." She nodded slowly, then leaned her head against my arm for a second, before walking to her room. The final hearing came soon after. River was sentenced. The judge listed the charges, the evidence, and the reasons behind the decision. I listened without expression. Nova cried like the world was ending. Madison glared at me the entire time. When the judge said the sentence out loud, I felt something strange. Grief for the kid River used to be, relief for the girl he hurt, and a sharp clarity about the future. The call came early in the morning, before the sun was up. I was in the kitchen making coffee when my phone rang with an unknown number. I answered without thinking. "Mr. Santiago?" a man asked. "This is the county jail. I'm calling regarding your son, River." My stomach dropped. "What happened?" There was a short pause. "River was involved in an altercation last night. He didn't survive his injuries." For a moment, everything around me went quiet. I didn't sit. I didn't speak. I just stood there, gripping the counter. "When can we—" I paused. "What are the next steps?" He explained procedures, paperwork, who would contact me next. I wrote nothing down, but the details stuck anyway. When the call ended, I stood there staring at the floor, until I heard footsteps behind me. Nova walked in, half asleep. "Who was that?" I turned toward her. "It was the county jail," I said. "River's gone." She let out a sound I'd never heard before, a scream so sharp it made Grace's door fly open down the hall. Nova dropped to her knees, banging her fists on the floor. "No, no, no!" She screamed until her voice broke, then screamed again. And then, just as suddenly, she went silent. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "This is your fault." I didn't respond right away. She stood up, shaking. "You handed him over." "You're the reason he's dead." Before I could speak, the front door burst open. Madison. Of course, she must have heard Nova from the driveway. "What happened?" she demanded. Nova pointed at me. "He killed River." Madison turned on me instantly. "You happy now? You destroyed your own son. You threw him to the wolves." I didn't argue. There was nothing I could say that would land. But then I heard the small voice I dreaded hearing. "River's dead?" Grace stood in the hallway, shaking, eyes huge, hands pressed to her chest. Nova's expression twisted. "Yes," she snapped. "And everything is ruined because—" "No," I cut in sharply. "Don't you say it." Nova glared at me, but the damage was done. Grace started breathing fast, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean— Did I make this happen?" She backed against the wall, her breaths turning quick and shallow. I moved toward her slowly. "Grace, look at me," I said firmly. "None of this is your fault. Not a single part of it." "But," she whispered. "No," I said again. "River made his own choices. This happened because of what he did, not because of you telling the truth." Her breathing steadied a little, but she still looked shaken. I guided her gently back toward her room, while Nova and Madison continued shouting in the living room. I stayed with Grace until she stopped trembling. She didn't cry. She just stared at the floor like she was waiting for someone to blame her again. When she finally lay down, I stepped out quietly and went back to the living room. Nova was pacing back and forth. Madison was on the phone with someone, probably spreading the news as dramatically as possible. Nova whirled toward me. "We could have gotten him help. We could have fixed this, but you had to ruin everything." "He hurt Grace," I said calmly. "You know that." "No," she snapped. "She was scared. River never—" "Stop rewriting what happened," I said. But she kept going. "Grace gets overwhelmed. She mixes things up. You should have talked to us instead of dragging our son into prison." Madison chimed in. "Grace always was dramatic. Sensitive kids exaggerate." That was it. They had moved from denial into full revisionism. Now they wanted to erase reality entirely. "I saw the messages," I said. "I heard Grace. I watched her break down over and over. Nothing she said was confused." Nova's eyes filled with rage. "You're choosing her over your own son." "She's alive," I said, "and she needs protection. That's my job." Nova grabbed the nearest decoration from the shelf and threw it across the room. It shattered on the floor. She didn't even look at it. She just kept crying and yelling, her emotions whipping from one extreme to another without any logic. By afternoon, she'd gone from screaming to sitting on the couch blankly, staring at nothing. Then she'd suddenly start talking to herself, whispering about how River used to hug her when he was little, how he was a good boy, how everything Grace said must have been twisted by all those outsiders. Grace heard some of it. She stayed in her room with the door closed, but I saw the fear in her eyes whenever Nova's voice rose. Her progress in therapy started slipping. She grew quieter, more closed off, like she was preparing for another explosion. Over the next few days, Nova's behavior worsened. She jumped between rage, sobbing, denial, and strange calm. She refused to eat. She called River's old friends at random. She told neighbors the system stole her son. Everything she did made Grace retreat further into herself. One night, Grace came to me and whispered, "Is Mom mad at me?" "No," I said. "She's grieving and she's not handling it right. But none of this is on you." She nodded, but I could see she didn't believe it. When she went back to bed, I sat in the hallway again, listening to Nova pacing the living room, talking to River as if he could hear her. And that's when it hit me clearly for the first time. Nova was no longer just grieving. She was becoming dangerous to Grace's recovery. Emotionally, mentally, maybe even physically. If I didn't step in soon, Grace would be dragged right back into the chaos she barely escaped. The weeks after River's death were a blur, but the one thing that stayed steady was Grace's therapy. She went twice a week now. Each session chipped away at the fear she carried around. She wasn't suddenly healed. She still startled at loud noises, still checked the hallway before walking to the kitchen, but she was slowly getting better. She talked a little more. She slept a little easier. She didn't jump every time the front door opened. I reorganized my entire work schedule. I stopped taking overtime, refused weekend rotations, and rearranged shifts so I could take her to therapy myself. My boss wasn't thrilled, but he didn't fight me. I think he saw I wasn't in a place to negotiate. Meanwhile, Nova barely existed in the house. She spent almost every day at the cemetery, sitting beside River's grave for hours. When she came home, she went straight to the bedroom without looking at Grace. If she did pass Grace in the hallway, she moved around her like Grace was invisible, or worse, like she was something to avoid. Madison, of course, made everything worse. She dropped by constantly, complaining loudly about how I destroyed the family. Sometimes she'd show up with cooked food and slam it onto the counter like she was doing us a favor. Other times, she'd deliberately speak loud enough for Grace to overhear, saying things like, "River wouldn't have died if people hadn't lied." I banned her from speaking that way in front of Grace, but she didn't listen. Eventually, I stopped letting her in the house at all. During this time, Mark, our neighbor, checked in on me here and there. He never pried. Sometimes he'd hand me leftover dinner he made. Sometimes he'd ask if Grace needed rides to school. Sometimes he'd just say, "Hang in there, man," in a way that didn't sound forced. He'd been a single dad before his son moved out, so he got it more than most. Even with that support, the house felt like a battlefield. The tension never went away because Nova refused to acknowledge reality. For a few days after that, she avoided me completely. No words, no yelling, just pacing the house like a ghost. Then the dam finally broke. It happened late at night. I was cleaning the kitchen when Nova stormed in, pale and shaking. "You did this!" she yelled. "You took my son from me. You took everything from me." She slammed her hand against the counter. "If you had protected him instead of Grace, he'd still be alive." That hit wrong. Very wrong. "You neglected Grace," I said. "You ignored her pain. You defended River, even after knowing what he did." Nova's eyes went wild. "Grace is the reason my son is dead." "No," I said. "River is the reason. Grace is the victim here." She stepped closer, screaming now. "You're disgusting. You sided with her. You let them take him. Because he hurt her," I said plainly. "And you let it happen under your nose." She tried to slap me, but I held her hand. Then she stormed down the hallway. Then I heard a sound that froze me. Grace's bedroom door banging open. I ran toward the hall and saw Nova inside Grace's room, holding a metal bat we kept in the closet for emergencies. She pointed it at Grace, who was backed against her headboard, terrified. "You ruined this family!" Nova screamed. Nova, drop it!" I shouted, stepping into the doorway. I rushed and grabbed the bat from her hands. She tried to yank it back, but I held firm and shoved her away a bit. "Out," I said. "Leave. Now." She stared at me, breathing heavily. Then she screamed. Not words, just rage. I followed her to the living room. "Pack a bag. You're leaving. Tonight. You can't kick me out of my own house," she yelled. "You came at our daughter with a bat," I replied. "You are done here." She sputtered, tried to argue, tried to deny it, tried to twist it, but I didn't move, didn't yell, didn't waver. "You're leaving," I repeated, "or I'm calling the police." She grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I locked it immediately. When I went back to Grace's room, she was still sitting on the bed, knees pulled to her chest, breathing fast. "It's okay," I said softly. "She's gone." She nodded slowly but didn't speak. I sat on the floor beside her bed until she finally lay down. That night, it became unmistakably clear. Nova wasn't just grieving anymore. She was a danger, and Grace would never be safe with her in this house again. As soon as the door slammed, I called the police. I didn't want a second chance for her to come back and finish what she started. The report was filed that night. I knew I needed to move fast. Nova was unpredictable, and Madison was even worse. I contacted a lawyer quietly. No announcements, no confrontation. I explained everything. The police reports, CPS involvement, the therapy documentation, and the incident with the bat. The lawyer didn't even blink. "You need sole custody," she said. "And you'll get it." We discussed finances, housing, school schedules, and how to keep Nova from interfering with therapy. She urged me to document everything, every message, every threat, every attempt from Nova or Madison to twist the story. The very next day, Madison proved her point. She showed up at the edge of my driveway, yelling across the yard like a deranged cheerleader. "You won't get custody? I'll testify. I'll tell the court how you manipulated Grace into lying." I didn't go outside. I just filmed her from the window. When she noticed, she flipped me off and drove away. I sent the footage straight to my lawyer. Grace watched from behind me and asked, "Why is Aunt Madison so mad at you?" "She doesn't want to believe what River did," I said. But it doesn't matter. She won't come near you again. Grace nodded slowly, like she was trying to accept it. With Nova out of the house, I started building a new routine for the two of us. Simple things at first. Cooking dinner together, even if it was just pasta or grilled cheese. Homework at the kitchen table. Evening walks to the mailbox. Drives to therapy with her music playing softly. She didn't talk much during those rides, but she didn't curl into herself either. That felt like progress. I also had to prepare for the custody hearing. Nova filed her own paperwork, filled with claims that Grace was brainwashed, that I forced her to accuse River, that I was emotionally abusive. The entitlement she'd shown all these years appeared in every sentence of that document. She truly believed she was the one who deserved sympathy. She refused accountability at every turn. She told relatives I tore the family apart. She told the court mediator Grace misremembered everything. She told her new therapist she was the victim in all of this. I didn't engage with any of it. My lawyer told me to stay calm, stay consistent, and stay focused on Grace. That part wasn't hard. The only real challenge was watching what Nova's denial did to Grace. Every nasty comment that leaked back to us, every claim that she had lied, pushed Grace backward emotionally. There were nights she'd quietly ask, "Is Mom mad at me forever?" And I had to keep reassuring her that Nova's anger wasn't her fault. I set hard boundaries with Nova. No contact with Grace unless arranged through lawyers. No showing up at the house. No speaking badly about Grace in public or private. Nova didn't like it, but she had no choice. The days of her controlling the narrative were over. 2 weeks into this new reality, something happened that I didn't expect. It was a normal therapy day. Grace was getting her shoes on while I grabbed my keys. Usually, she preferred I drop her off and wait in the car or run errands nearby. She liked the privacy, or maybe she just wasn't ready for more. But that day, she walked up to me slowly, holding her jacket in her arms. "Dad?" she said quietly. "Yeah?" She hesitated, eyes flicking toward the floor. "Can you sit in the waiting room instead of leaving?" I froze for a second, not because I didn't want to, but because the question hit hard. It was the first time in years she'd asked for closeness without being scared or overwhelmed. "Of course," I said. "I'll be right there the whole time." She nodded and gave a small relieved breath, like she'd been afraid I might say no. We drove in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. She kept looking out the window with a calm expression I hadn't seen in a long time. When we arrived, she walked beside me instead of trailing behind like she used to. Inside the clinic, she checked in, then looked back at me before going through the door with her therapist. Not scared, just making sure I was still there. I sat down in the waiting room. It wasn't anything special. Old magazines, soft music, coffee machine that probably hadn't been cleaned in months. I leaned back and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. This was what being a father was supposed to feel like. Not providing from a distance, not assuming everything was fine, not working myself into exhaustion while the people I loved struggled alone. This, right here, showing up when it mattered, staying close, choosing the living child who still needed me. This was where it actually started. When the session ended, Grace stepped out and looked for me immediately. When she saw I was still sitting there, she gave the smallest smile. But it was real, and in that moment, I knew. The divorce, the chaos, the fights, it didn't matter. I chose my daughter, and I'd choose her every time. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.